I thank you for the opportunity to come and speak to you about this project that we had taken on approximately 5 years ago. Just to give you an overview of the presentation today, I really am going to go over a little bit of CTAC's noise mitigation history, our history with the RNP, and what we call the Greener Skies project. That was just the term of really implementing some different procedures at SeaTac Airport that would take advantage of some noise reduction aspects, some carbon emissions, fuel, that sort of thing that went along with it. Challenges with the implementation of that, and then I'll give you some lessons learned. And really what I'll really focus on today is less of the technical aspect of implementing these type of procedures and more of the community relations portion of that. As Simon had talked about in the previous presentation, it's really essential for that community buy-in. If you don't have the community buy-in, you're going to have the opposition being formed against the airport with these type of programs. What we tried to do at SeaTac, well, actually, let me tell you a little bit about SeaTac. We have 381,000 operations, 42 million passengers, and what really is the most interesting aspect of SeaTac is we're totally surrounded by community. It's all residential, completely surrounding the airport. So there really is no opportunity to do much other than overfly residential areas. And we do have some very well-informed communities. So the people underneath that flight pattern around SeaTac Airport are very much aware of all aspects of the airport. They study up on all the programs, national programs, implementation, all of the programs that are problems that are happening throughout the United States. They're very much aware of, and they'll talk to us about that. Our approach to noise mitigation is just the whole package. And as you can see, we've got noise mitigation from residential acquisition, a lot of insulation programs. In fact, with the sound insulation programs and the mitigation in general, we've spent over $400 million worth of mitigation programs. So we have a very mature program in that area. We've had noise abatement procedures in place for many years at SeaTac Airport. So in order to try and increase or decrease the noise a little bit more, put another drop in the bucket, we now have tried to implement the RNP, RNAV procedures with the OPDs with it. So that's just another tool that we're using in this full suite of programs that we have. So it started out with an idea between Alaska Airlines and SeaTac Airport on what could we do to reduce noise at the airport since we've been doing all these other things. Alaska Airlines had been flying into Alaska, into these remote locations for many years using RNP, so they kind of pioneered it for the US market. So that's why we brought them in, plus they're our hometown carrier, so they have the most operations at SeaTac. All of their aircraft were equipped with it, so that actually helped us to have a partner within the solution. When we started to look at where it could benefit the area, we have what we call a 4-post plan. So we bring arrivals in from 4 different quadrants of the area and funnel them into the airport. Those arrivals and departures we call the 4-post plan. We started to look at where we could get the benefits from, and we found out that 50% of our arrivals were coming from the west side. And we found out also that over those west side procedures, most of it's over water, most of it's over industrial corridor until it gets closer down into the airport for the final approach, which is over the community. So we decided to focus our energy on that approach area because it would give us the best benefit. And the reason why we didn't go over the other areas, the other quadrants up there, is that those were mostly residential in all areas. We couldn't find an area that was overflown by water or something like that. So we knew that once we started to condense those tracks with RNP, they would have an impact on all the other areas. So we didn't focus our projects within those other areas. So what we really tried to do was identify the opportunities that we could really find for these procedures. So we found out with west side approaches only, number of people impacted by aircraft noise overflown. So what this chart shows is the green arrow is where we're trying to, or where we tried to do the RNP tracks to get them all within that over the water area, through the bay and down into the airport. The blue tracks up above are showing really a swath of area where the tracks were originally going when they were on the traditional ILS approach. So we're finding between the 2 tracks up there, if we were to get all tracks through the bay on the green line, we would have about 200,000 people fewer overflown at that area. So a fairly significant noise reduction just by saying fewer people are overflown on the final approach paths. Has reduced emissions, reduced fuel and flight time, and I have those numbers a little bit farther down in the presentation here. So to gain the project support, when we started to put this together, a lot of the air traffic and a lot of the other airlines, a few of the other airlines within it, really were not supportive of it. Especially the air traffic organization, the FAA, really didn't want to go through the effort to try and do something different. And it took a while to get them on board and to really bring them in and understand that these are something that's going to happen in the future. This was approximately 6-7 years ago. Something that's going to happen in the future, and get them on board. So we really started an outreach to the Federal Aviation Administration, did a lot of outreach to our local elected officials, and we gained some community support through that continued outreach, just making sure that the community was aware of what we were trying to do and what we were trying to achieve with this. And that was really the airport's goal of making sure that the project was successful. For the airlines at the time, fuel prices were going sky high at the time. We analyzed it. We found that an average 737 burns about 1 drum of fuel every 3 minutes, 54 seconds. So that's a lot of fuel that's burned every time. If you could reduce those track miles, you're going to reduce the fuel burn. And that was just a way we could quantify that. In 2010, the FAA actually agreed to take this project on as what we call the Greener Skies project. It's a next-gen project. So next-gen in the United States is a whole suite of tools that the FAA is using to modernize their airspace and their air traffic. RNP is one just drop in the bucket of all those tools that they have. We began through 2010 to 2013, we held project team development meetings. Now, what we found was essential is to have the airport on those team meetings, the airlines in those team meetings, air traffic in the team meetings, and the procedures development team. And what the airport found was that when we're setting in there and air traffic is saying that we'd like to put a star point over here in order to develop those procedures, the airport could come back and say, no, if you put that there, we're going to have an impact greater there. So move it over a little bit. So we went through probably a year of just developing all of the points along the ground to make sure that it fit with the community and was not going to have a greater impact on the community than what it would have. So sometimes you need that person that's actually dealing with the complaints, understanding where the issues are within the community for the airport noise, to be on that team to make sure that it's understood what is going to happen if you change those procedures. FAA, Alaska Airlines, SeaTac, and the Boeing Company were the main project leaders of the team as we went along. And again, I just mentioned it's really essential. If I could drive home one thing for the group, it is really saying that the airport, at least for United States airports, that's that we found, to be on that team to make sure it's successful. And we brought in as many airlines as we could, just a list of them there, but there were many more that participated along the way. The FAA went through what they called an environmental analysis, an EA, a very formal process in order to find out if and what the impacts are going to be to a change of a procedure. So it was very well documented. I believe it's still online if you want to take a look at it. And they went through the noise analysis, the carbon analysis, all of this to find out what exactly the impacts are going to be. They came out with the finding of what they call no significant impact. So with the change in that one procedure, they went out into the community, and I went with them, and we held 2 community meetings, one north of the airport, one south of the airport. We presented all the data that we could have. In fact, we set up stations with poster boards of all the new procedures, gave presentations, talked about the whole thing with the community. And the one area north of the airport that was identified as possibly having a 0.1 to 0.2 DNL increase that is so insignificant that you couldn't tell the change. But what happened is the community heard increase in noise. Even though it was 0.1, 0.2, they just heard an increase in noise. So really they didn't understand what it was about. So there was probably a failure in a little bit of communication. This is something we learned, to be very clear with the data when you go out into the community, because you don't want that anger. You don't want to build that anger. You want to provide as much information as you possibly could that is, again, understandable to the community. Very simple language. Our mistake probably was saying there was a 0.2 dB increase out there. So what we had to do is go back. We had to pull ourselves back, and we had to restructure our meetings, and we had to go back out into the communities and try and mitigate this issue that came up. So we were back out there on numerous occasions just doing these open house type events. We found presentation style really didn't work with big groups, but having a big room open for about 4 hours for anybody to come in and talk about it, full disclosure on the project, helps to get that buy-in from the community. It helps to understand really what is going on with the project and having them clearly understand that it is a benefit for both the community, the airlines, and the airport. So we did a lot of that. And again, a lot of it was anger out there too. We had a lot of people come in very angry about the situation. I think though in the end we were able to turn that around quite a bit. And in 2016, I want to say we've had very few noise complaints received that were actually associated with RNP. Now this is the interesting thing. We have a small swath of area that have a greater impact to a few homes, just a very small number of homes. But we have a huge swath of residential area around the airport. And one of the #1 complaints we hear now is RNP is destroying my life, when they're nowhere near an RNP track. So what they hear, changes, you had changes to the airspace, so that automatically is something to do with me, and now we have those complaints come in. We have about 2,000 complaints a year on those. The FAA's spacing rules does not allow all RNPs to hit the runways. So again, it's that mix of ILS and RNPs that at SeaTac Airport specific, we still can't get the full mix of those aircraft coming in to the full approach to the runway. What does it look like today? So when we went in 2013, began looking at the project to compare what it is today, you can see on the right side with the condensed track, that area over what we call Vashon Island there is the area that was really the condensed track. So I think we've received about 2 complaints since we've implemented that in the last few years. So I don't want to dismiss those complaints because they're actually the ones that have an impact. They really do. But in general terms, it's been a very successful project because we're able to do this with an area that didn't have as much residential areas. So just to quantify it, Boeing did a report in 2015 coming out with some results of how they viewed the project. And if you look on basically the baseline area, we have 3 scenarios there: an early approach or a far out approach when the weather gets bad, so they're vectored farther out to bring them into final approach. We found that on the distance nautical miles, it's the worst case scenario is 23.5 nautical miles saved, and time would be 7.2 minutes saved, 746 pounds of fuel, and 2,354 pounds of carbon. So significant savings on one approach coming into the airport with the 737 if they were to use that, fully utilize that RNP approach. So if all equipped airlines at SeaTac, this is what they came up with: reduced fuel consumption by 2.7 million gallons, reduced carbon by 25,600 metric tons, equivalent to about 5,400 cars. And again, with this track 2, which wasn't mentioned in the Boeing report, there's about 200,000 reduction in people overflown within it also. We've done a little analysis here, and we really wanted to determine how do we track RNP flights. So in the sky, when the airport's tracking flights up there, we wanted to develop a way to actually find out which tracks are coming in under RNP, which tracks are coming in under traditional ILS. So we set up within a flight tracking system these kind of imagined spheres in the sky, and we said if an aircraft hits at least 4 of those directly, one after the other, we're pretty confident it's an RNP because it has that very precise track. So we're able to look at that, and we come up right now at only about 200 flights per day using that one specific track, but that's still significant for us. What did we learn? We have to have airport staff on the development team, knowledgeable about it. And the one thing I say is get out in the community with your information. Once you have the idea developed, once you understand where the tracks are going to be, especially if there's going to be any kind of impact, or even if there's not an impact, if it's a benefit, get out there, show the information, make sure it's understood by the community, talk as much as you can. I mean, we continually are out in the community about every month still talking about this. City council meetings, general community meetings, we put on open houses on a regular basis, and that really helps gain that support. So right now what we've seen is that this huge community opposition down to a very small community opposition to this, just because we've given the information out a lot on this. And condensed flight tracks are really the concern with it. That's the overview of it. So if we have any questions.
Ja, vielen Dank für die Präsentation.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Hier nochmal ganz neu gesehen, wie Sie mit dem Thema
we've seen how you deal with that in the public and with the communities all around the airport. Any questions from your side to Mr. Shepard? I don't see any question.
Doch, da eine.
There is one.
Ministry of Transportation. Sir, I would like to know if your main target was to reduce complaints or to reduce noise emission.
Yeah, it wouldn't be to reduce complaints. That we don't really, I guess we don't judge the impact to the community based on complaints, because we do get a lot of times the calling campaign will come in from one community to another. So the goal was never to reduce complaints. The goal is to reduce noise, for sure, whether that's associated with complaints or not. Emissions, for the airport, it was noise and emissions, because we do track those. For the airline specifically, it was very much about reducing fuel, track miles and fuel, and to increase their profits, of course. Yep.
Okay, weitere Fragen noch? Da hinten, Herr Vogelsang.
Any other questions? Mr. Vogelsang in the back.
Reduction. Do you have any airport monitoring system to verify your reduction?
Yes, we do have a noise monitoring system, but unfortunately it's not in the areas that are underneath that RNP track. So we're not tracking it that way, but we have done quite a bit of noise modeling for it. So we've done, the Federal Aviation Administration's done extensive noise modeling to understand where the changes would occur. And with the RNP track, it's so subtle in most areas that the only area that we're really seeing a very minor change is the farther out downwind leg of the approach to where they're actually on the OPD.
Okay, Fragen noch?
Questions?
Das scheint nicht der Fall zu sein.
This seems not to be the case. Mr. Shepard, thank you very much for your presentation.